This is what we're going to do today. I just thought we'd spend a minute on why we're here, talking about who is this enlightened learner, how do we create this environment in which we can best seize these opportunities, the genius of and. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but I'll go over it. It's one of my favorites. I'll talk a little bit about social learning and what's happening, and to Carmen's point, the buzz. It's really trendy right now, and we'll talk a little bit about why. I have two exercises in there, and then I'll go through some steps about how you can become this enlightened learner. So hopefully at the end of the 30 minutes, we'll all have 1 to 2 things we can take away to try this afternoon, tomorrow, and going forward. So the reason that I think we're here today is to stop and just think about how do we seize all the multiple learning opportunities that are around us that we aren't stopping to think about and using. And this is something that I'm going to call social learning. The reason it's such a buzz these days is because all of the social media tools that we have. Maybe another time when I come back, I'd love to do a session on social learning and social media. That can be sort of part number 2. But today I won't talk about the social media tools. But please know that the sort of undercurrent behind social learning is really being fueled by all of our networking and our collaborating and all of the tools that we're using. Why is all of this important? It's really important that we start to be more enlightened learners. It's important for your team, for innovation. It's important for the organization and all your customers. It's really important for your own personal professional development, your career progress, and your own expertise. No longer is it a company's responsibility to make sure that you're learning what you need to know. Certainly they have one level of responsibility, but the accountability is on you. So who is this enlightened learner? I had to spend some time thinking about this, but in my mind it's somebody who's really happy to share what they know. They clear their mind of judgment when they're speaking with you. They believe that they can add to conversations. So again, thinking about our social media tools, it's very much people adding what they think. If you go to those recipe blogs, it's, well, if you add a little bit more tomato sauce, it will taste like this, and I did this, and I tried that. And so people are collaborating, and everybody is learning and adding. Somebody who's humble and is moving away from this concept of knowledge is power. So I'm sure we all remember in the workplace, knowledge is power. In fact, what we now know is power can be pretty isolating. And the way you have power is through this collaborating and through this mindfulness and through this contribution. And that's what innovation is all about. And there are some great videos that I didn't include today between Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. So I can send you the links to those if anybody's interested. And it's really about how they capture innovation and what it means to them. Consciously recognize that you are learning and you can learn every single day at work. Nurtures relationships with self, team, and organization. And the reason that I put that in there is because if you don't stop and think about being an enlightened learner from your own perspective, you're not going to be so effective with your team and with your organization. And what I mean by that is if you don't stop to think about what are the things that you personally need to learn, what is your brand, who are you, what are your strengths and weaknesses, what do you bring to a team, what do you bring to your role, where could you be better? If you're not stopping and having that conversation with yourself, you're doing your team a disservice and you're doing the organization a disservice. So the responsibility really does lie on you. Builds networks mindfully. So again, this is an area where we are seeing, certainly in the social space outside of work, but more and more organizations are picking up how do we build on these networks, how do we leverage them, and how do we help our employees access them. So part of that challenge is creating this enlightened environment. So I think that it's about creating a community of leaders and colleagues through social learning. This is asking questions. This is constantly building for your customers the products and services that you would want to have. So it's really, again, stopping and being mindful and thinking, is this something that I would want to have? And if the answer is no, you need to go back and rebuild it or fix it. Being entrepreneurial, being innovative, being a tinkerer, turning things upside down, thinking about things. And instead of saying that you know the answer all the time, trying to work with people to say, tell me more, look at things in different perspectives. Creating access. So to my earlier point when we used to think that knowledge was power, in fact now what you want to do is if somebody asks you something, tell them everything you know. Share what you know, and finally display what you have. So I think that these are some of the things that teams can look to build. Any other kinds of community practice, if you don't call them teams, I think, to start meetings off like this and to start to think about what are maybe not that list, but 2 things that we can focus on in order to create this enlightened environment. So the genius of and. This is something that was hot in the 90s, and as all of these trends, I think they always go away and come back. So I think this one is really coming back at us now as we're moving more into collaboration, coaching, all of these spaces that we know is working for people in the workplace. And I think that the truly enlightened learner needs to mindfully be including the word and all the time. So a challenge that I will give you is the next time somebody throws an idea out there, instead of saying, yeah, no, try to say, and how would that work? And what would you do? Because sometimes people throw things out there and it's half-baked. It isn't really an idea, but it's just begging for somebody to pick it apart and put it back together again. And that's what we use our networks for. And for anybody who's active in the social media space, that's what you do. You throw an idea out there and you say, what do you think about this, everybody? And often you get back responses saying, well, that's interesting. Did you think about this? And what about that? And did you consider this? So really, this genius of and is what's going to help us become more enlightened learners. I'm just going to keep going unless anybody wants to stop me. Is that okay? Okay. So I know that Carmen referred to these models of learning. This one is similar to what she suggested, but we know that formal learning, so that's anything that happens in a classroom, is really about 10%. We really learn what we know from classroom, 10% of what we know from classroom. 10%. That's really low. Now, we will never be able to move away, at least I don't think so, from formal classroom learning because there are always new skills that should always be sort of delivered by an expert. So we know that this notion of the sage on the stage or a facilitator, an expert, is always going to be important. What we need to try to work towards is let's take that 10% and marry it with the other 70 and 20% in order to have a really powerful learning experience. So the 20%, the informal learning, what you call coaching and mentoring, historically, or I would say up until today and all of this that's going on with social networking, that was really about coaching and mentoring and about one-to-one. So you would walk over to your colleague and you would say, can you help me with this Excel spreadsheet? I don't know what I'm doing on this presentation. Could you help me? I'm not really clear on, what so-and-so is asking me. So while that's how you learned, is from an expert or from a colleague or from somebody who's standing right next to you, it was always a one-to-one interaction. What's happening now in this social learning experiential space is it's a collection where you have more than 3 people. So typically how we're defining this social learning space is more than 3. So anybody who's on Facebook, in any type of an interaction, always more than 3. So when you're creating a network at work, or when you're trying to knock around a new team idea, when you have more than 3, we're going to call it social learning. So this is where we need to start to spend more time. This is where we need to be challenging our thinking, challenging other people's assumptions, and getting the ideas out there. So where do we start in the workplace? I have a very long list. I'll just warn you, there are about 12 things, 5 on the next page. So clearly we have a lot to do. So I just wanted to go through these, or maybe just give you a minute to read through them. I don't need to read them out to you. But I think the call to action on these, and I'll show you a few more on the next slide. You know, my call to action is really don't try to tackle all 8. Can you choose 2 from this list? And I won't ask you to call them out, but can you choose 2? And think about this afternoon or tomorrow, and what is it that you can choose from this list that you can incorporate immediately? So for me, number 8 is something that I try to do a lot. I love working in this social space. Social media, social learning is a hot thing for me, and I know my team on Knightsbridge are also really excited by it. It's part of my job to help them get it and understand it. So when I find an article or a video or that entrepreneurial YouTube, I send it to them and say, hey, you might want to have a look at this. This is really interesting. What do you think about this? Why don't you spend a minute looking at this? Or at team meetings, we will make an effort to say, okay, what's our theme? Just for 15 minutes, not to hijack the entire meeting, but what should we talk about today where we can all learn something new or different, or somebody on the team has an expertise. And so my challenge to you is to just pick 1 or 2 things off this list of 8 to do this afternoon or tomorrow. I continue on. Clearly, I have lots to say about this. So, e-communications from leadership and learning. So this is Carmen's team. I know it's probably a little bit about watch this space in ways that they can support you becoming more enlightened learners. Peer coaching is really important, and I know it's definitely something at Knightsbridge that we promote, is the whole coaching model. And trying to instill a peer coaching, a formal peer coaching solution into your teams or into your unit may also help. And by that I mean find an expert and find 20 minutes a month where that expert can lead a team on a challenge that you're having. And share your learnings with your networks. So I think that that's important. If people here use LinkedIn groups or Facebook groups or what have you, you only get what you give to networks. So that's really important. If you're just a passive member of a network, you won't get anything out of it. The more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And anybody who is active, blogger or anything like that will reinforce that. So, by way of a summary, I tried to break it down to 6 steps. The first one is really important. It's just the recognizing that you are learning and you can learn every day at work. It isn't just about formal learning events. It isn't just about going on a training course or going to a conference or anything. That in fact, it's around us, and it's really up to you to embrace it. To be consciously and mindfully learning from others. So again, that's picking people's brains, that's using the and how would you do that, and how would that play out, and how can I help you with that might be another thing, which leads me to happy to share what you know and to share your experiences. So if you want access to this performance support tools, I'm sure that Maple Leaf already has an awful lot to offer. And again, maybe that's overwhelming, so pick 2. Maybe it's a SharePoint site, maybe it's the L&D site, maybe it's going to one place. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Carmen, but pick 2. Okay, she will at the end. So rely on your networks, Carmen's networks. These networks are made up of friends, colleagues, professionals. Let them help you. If there's one thing that we're learning from the whole social media movement, is let them help you. Let the networks help you. Contribute to them and take from them, and contribute and take. And that's really what we're talking about here. So that ends my formal type of presentation, and I appreciate your time.